You've probably seen this tower, the one in China wrapped in glass that makes its own electricity, but almost everything the headlines told you about it is wrong. They call it the world's first skyscraper made entirely of transparent solar panels, a building that powers itself from its windows. The truth is stranger. Those panels cover 3 sides, and they supply only a quarter of the power it burns in a day. If the glass were the whole story, the lights would go dark before lunch. The reason China calls this a world first is sitting in the basement. Down at the bottom of the tower sit 14 battery packs that used to live inside electric cars. They were pulled out, stacked up, and given a second job. And they are a bigger part of this building story than the famous glass on the outside. But to see why, you have to know what this tower actually is, because the headline version and the real version are 2 different buildings. The real one opened on August 24, 2025 in Qingdao on the coast of eastern China. It stands 117 meters tall, 23 floors of offices, and it belongs to a company called Teld New Energy, one of the largest electric vehicle charging operators in the country. China did not call it the first solar skyscraper. State media called it the world's first ultra-zero carbon building. Those are not the same claim, and the gap between them is the whole point of this video. That phrase, ultra-zero carbon, is worth slowing down on, because a lot of buildings call themselves green. Most of them mean they are efficient. Good insulation, LED lighting, a rooftop of solar panels to shave a bit off the bill. Ultra-zero carbon is a much bigger promise. It means the building is supposed to run its full daily operation without adding any net carbon to the atmosphere at all. That is a far higher bar than simply using less energy than the tower next door, and you cannot clear it by adding a bit more insulation. You get there by rethinking how the building gets its power in the first place, because a solar skyscraper would just be a tall building with panels bolted onto it. A zero-carbon building is a promise that the whole thing runs, every single day, without burning anything to do it. And here is the problem with that promise. The solar glass covers only a fraction of the tower's daily appetite for power. So the question that actually matters is simple. How does a building that makes just a quarter of its own electricity still get all the way to zero? Start with the part everyone photographed. The outside of the tower is wrapped in what engineers call a photovoltaic glass curtain wall. It is exactly what it sounds like. The glass that would normally just be a window is also quietly generating electricity, using a thin film of a material called cadmium telluride baked into the pane. Sunlight hits the facade, and the facade feeds current straight into the building. That material choice matters more than it sounds. Most of the solar panels you have seen, the dark blue ones on rooftops, are made of crystalline silicon, and silicon does not want to be see-through. Cadmium telluride is a thin film technology. It can be laid down in a semi-transparent layer, it holds up better in heat and haze and weak angled light, and it can be manufactured in large flat sheets. In other words, it is one of the few solar technologies you can actually turn into the wall of a building instead of a box you mount on the roof. That is why this facade can be a window and a generator at the same time. Now notice where they put it. The panels cover the east, the south, and the west faces of the tower, 3 sides out of 4. The one side they left bare is the north face, the side that barely sees the sun in that part of the world. That was a deliberate call. Nobody wanted to hang expensive power-generating glass on the one wall where it would barely catch any light and never earn its keep. There is one more clever detail in that glass, and it explains a number people love to brag about. The curtain wall produces direct current, DC power, the same kind a battery stores. Most buildings run on the alternating current that comes off the grid, so every time you move power around, you pay a small tax converting between the two. By generating DC on the skin of the building and using it as DC inside, this tower skips some of those conversions and loses less along the way. It is a small saving on paper. Multiplied across a whole tower every day for decades, it adds up. So the glass is genuinely smart, it is just not generous. On an average day, it replaces about 25% of the building's electricity, and it banks roughly 1,500 kilowatt hours of clean energy in the process, which sounds like a lot until you hear the other number. This tower burns through about 6,000 kilowatt hours of electricity every single day. Lights, elevators, air conditioning, hundreds of people and their screens. The famous glass covers a quarter of that. Do the subtraction, and you're staring at a gap. 3/4 of the power this so-called zero-carbon building needs does not come from its own solar skin. Now, to put that in perspective, think about a normal glass office tower. the kind that fills every skyline on Earth. It generates none of its own power. 0. Every watt it uses, it buys from the grid, and most of that grid still runs on coal and gas. So an ordinary skyscraper making a quarter of its own clean electricity would already be unusual. The problem is that a quarter is not 0, and this building promised 0, which means the interesting engineering cannot be the glass at all. This is exactly where the headline falls apart. If the real story were that the walls power the building, that gap would sink it, because a tower that makes a quarter of what it uses is just an ordinary building wearing an expensive coat. So either China is exaggerating, or the actual engineering is somewhere the cameras never pointed. And it turns out the cameras were pointed at the least impressive part of the whole system. To close that gap, the tower leaves its generation exactly where it is and gets radically smarter about the electricity it already has, which is where those dead car batteries come back in. Remember the 14 battery packs in the basement? Every one of them started life inside an electric car, hit the point where it was too worn out to trust on the road, and got retired. In most of the world, that is where an EV battery story ends. It gets recycled at best, or it sits in a warehouse becoming a disposal problem. Here it starts a second career instead, a car battery that is too tired to safely push a vehicle down. A highway is still holding most of its capacity, and it has plenty left for a job that never moves and never needs to accelerate. The car uses that battery hard for years, and then the building gives it an easy retirement. This is a big deal beyond one tower, because the entire world is about to have this exact problem. Tens of millions of electric cars are on the road today, with hundreds of millions more coming this decade, and every one of them will eventually retire a battery. What China is showing here is a template for catching those packs on the way to the scrap heap and squeezing years of useful life out of them first. Engineers call it cascade utilization. One expensive object does two jobs back to back instead of one. Here is what those packs actually do all day. When the sun is up and the glass is generating more than the building needs, the extra pours into the batteries instead of getting wasted. Then, at night, when the grid is quiet and electricity is cheap, the packs top themselves up with cheap off-peak power. And when demand spikes or the sky goes gray for a week, the building pulls from the batteries instead of buying expensive power at the worst possible moment. Each pack runs one full charge and discharge cycle a day. Look at what that really is. The building is storing electricity when it is cheap and clean, then spending it when buying would be expensive and dirty. That has a name in the energy business. It is called arbitrage. The tower is playing the electricity market with its own basement, and the retired batteries are the vault. The solar glass fills the vault for free during daylight. The grid tops it off cheaply at night. The building almost never has to buy power at the wrong moment. And there is a bonus that runs the other direction. When this building soaks up cheap power at 3 in the morning and leans on its own batteries during the afternoon crunch, it stops being a spike on the grid's worst hours. A power grid hates nothing more than everybody demanding electricity at the same time. A building that quietly shifts its own load off the peak is doing the grid a favor, and thousands of buildings like it would smooth the whole system out. The tower helps stabilize the very grid it is pulling from, but the basement batteries are still only half of this building's trick. The other half is parked upstairs in the garage. Remember who owns this tower. Teld New Energy does not sell coffee or software. It builds and runs electric vehicle chargers, thousands of them across China. So the company put its own product to work holding up its own headquarters. The cars charging in this building's garage are not only drinking power, they can push it back. Engineers call the setup vehicle to building, and the idea is almost funny once it clicks. A parking garage full of electric cars is, if you squint, a parking garage full of batteries on wheels. Most of the day, those batteries just sit there fully charged, doing nothing useful. This building taps them. When the tower needs power and the sun is not cooperating, some of it can come from the cars downstairs, then get replaced when rates drop again. For most companies, that would be science fiction. For this one, it is barely a stretch, because managing a fleet of car batteries and moving power in and out of them on a schedule is the exact thing Teld already does for a living. The headquarters is really just their whole business turned inward and pointed at a single building. And this is where the tower stops being a curiosity and starts looking like a preview. The whole world is trying to run on solar and wind, and the hardest part of that is storage. Those sources make plenty of power, but they make it on their own schedule, not yours. And holding onto it until you actually need it is the piece the clean energy shift keeps getting stuck on. Meanwhile, The cheapest storage anyone could ask for is already sitting in driveways and garages in the form of tens of millions of electric cars that spend most of their lives parked and plugged in. A building that can lean on the cars in its own basement is a small early version of something every power grid on Earth is about to need. Qingdao just happened to build one before almost anyone else. If this kind of teardown is useful to you, the way a headline says one thing and the engineering says another, take a second to subscribe. This channel pulls apart China's biggest technology and infrastructure claims every week and works out what is actually going on underneath. Now back to how this one tower actually pulls it off. So count the sources feeding this place. There's the solar glass on 3 faces. There are the 14 dead car batteries in the basement. There is the grid at night when it is cheap. And there's a garage of living car batteries that can pay power back up the line. No single one of those runs the building. Stacked together and shuffled at the right moments, they cover the whole 6,000 kilowatt hours with almost no carbon behind it. But stacking the sources is the easy part. Shuffling them at exactly the right moment every second of the day is the hard part. And that job belongs to something you cannot see at all. Walk into this tower and reach for a light switch, and you may not find one. The building has almost none. Instead, spread through the structure, there are close to 24,000 tiny sensors. They watch the lighting, the air conditioning, the elevators, and they make thousands of small decisions a person used to make by flipping a switch. That sounds like a gimmick until you connect it to everything we just walked through. A building juggling solar, basement batteries, cheap night grid power, and cars that feed backward has to decide constantly where every watt should come from and where it should go. Pull from the batteries now or ride the solar a while longer. Charge the packs or sell back to the grid. Dim this floor because nobody's on it? That is not a decision you make once. It is a decision the building makes every few seconds, in 24,000 places at the same time. No human staff could keep up with it, which is the whole reason the switches are gone. The sensors are the nervous system that makes the whole balancing act possible. Without them, you would have a pile of clever hardware and no way to coordinate it. With them, the solar and the batteries and the cars and the grid stop being 4 separate things and start behaving like one machine that knows exactly how much power it has and exactly how much it needs, minute by minute. This is the piece that lifts a building generating only a sliver of what it needs all the way to fully green. The tower got there without a single extra panel, just a smarter way to spend the power it already had. There is a name for a system like this, borrowed from the power industry. It is called a virtual power plant. Normally, that means software knitting together a scattered crowd of solar roofs and home batteries so the grid can treat them as one controllable plant. This tower runs a virtual power plant inside a single building. The developer describes the heart of the project as the fusion of 3 networks: a charging network, a microgrid, and a storage network, all managed as one. The glass, the packs, the cars, and the sensors all answer to that single system. They were built together as one power plant that happens to have offices inside it. So step back and look at what China actually built. This was never really a skyscraper made of solar panels. It is a building that runs itself like a power company. It generates, it stores, it buys low and uses high, it borrows from the cars in its own garage, and it balances all of it in real time. Grid operators do this across entire cities. This tower does it inside a single address. The people who built it say as much. One official from a Chinese industry research center described the tower not as a structure, but as a complete energy ecosystem. And the digital brain is not just for show. The company behind the building says going fully digital cut its construction costs by 20 to 30%, improved how efficiently it runs by around 30%, and took roughly 30% off its energy bills. The intelligence pays for itself. So when you hear the phrase transparent solar skyscraper, remember that the glass is just the part they printed on the poster. Everything that earned this building its world-first title is happening behind that glass. In hardware and software, most people will never see. Now for the part the launch coverage skipped. This is not a magic building, and it is worth being honest about its scale. It cuts carbon emissions by about 500 tons a year, which is real, but modest for a structure this size. And its walls generate only a fraction of what it uses. If you graded this tower purely on how much clean power its skin makes, it would be unremarkable. But generation was never the point, and that is the trap the headline sets. The breakthrough here has almost nothing to do with the quantity of green energy. What matters is that they proved you can knit cheap, imperfect second-hand pieces into a building that still hits 0 carbon. Retired batteries nobody else wanted. A grid that is dirty by day and cleaner and cheaper at night. Panels that only work on 3 walls. On their own, every one of those is a compromise. Coordinated by software, they add up to a building that did not need a breakthrough in solar panels to get to zero. And that is what makes it dangerous to dismiss. Buildings are one of the largest sources of carbon on the planet because everything inside them runs on electricity that mostly still comes from burning something. China has promised to stop adding to its carbon total before the year 2060, and it cannot get there without fixing the millions of towers its cities are already full of. A brand new showpiece grabs headlines, but the thing that actually moves the numbers is a method cheap enough to repeat on the buildings a country already has. That is why the company was careful to describe this one as a demonstration, a blueprint others could copy. The tower took less than 2 years to build from the spring of 2023 to early 2025 across about 43,000 square meters. But the electricity it makes is almost beside the point. What this project really produced is a working recipe. Because the batteries are second-hand and the coordination is software, this is the kind of system that could, in theory, be fitted to buildings that are already standing without tearing them down and starting over. It is worth sitting with what that would mean. Picture this logic spreading as a standard kit rather than a trophy. Solar skin where it makes sense. A stack of retired car batteries in the basement, a link to the cars in the garage, and software smart enough to run all of it together. Every building that switched over would cut its own carbon while also acting as a small shock absorber for the grid, taking clean power when the system has too much of it and handing it back at the peaks. Enough buildings doing that would let a city lean on far fewer fossil fuel plants, and almost none of that made the headlines, which stopped at the glass. Which brings us back to where we started, and to the one thing this building could not do. For all its cleverness, it still had to accept that its own glass would cover barely a quarter of the load. The solar skin was the weakest link in an otherwise brilliant machine, and the engineers designed around it because, in 2025, a quarter is close to the best that kind of glass can do. They built a genius power system precisely because the power source itself was not good enough yet. But that ceiling is exactly what a different set of Chinese labs is attacking right now, and it is where this story goes next. Because researchers have been chasing glass that generates electricity with no tint and no bulk, clear enough to pass as an ordinary window and still pull power out of the sunlight streaming through it. If they get there, the quarter that capped this tower turns from a ceiling into a starting line. How close that clear, power-generating glass actually is, and why the engineers who have seen it are stunned, is the breakdown on screen right now. Start there,